The restaurant was already loud before the sun fully disappeared from the sky. Plates clinked, chairs scraped against the floor, and voices overlapped from every direction. Laughter burst out from one table, followed by a loud clap from another. It was the kind of place where people came to forget their long days, to eat quickly, talk freely, and leave without thinking too much. No one came here expecting anything special. The waitress moved between tables with practiced ease. Her steps were steady, almost quiet, even though the floor was busy. She balanced plates on her arm, refilled glasses, and nodded politely to customers who barely looked up. Most people saw her only for a second or two, just long enough to ask for extra sauce or complain that their food was late. She had been working there for years, long enough to know which tables would tip well and which ones never did. Long enough to recognize the sound of a glass about to fall and the look on a customer's face before they started complaining. Her face stayed calm, her voice soft, and her smile gentle. It was not the kind of smile that demanded attention. It was the kind that passed unnoticed. At one corner table, a group of friends laughed loudly at a joke that wasn't very funny. They spoke over one another, tapping their phones and waving their hands in the air. Nearby, a couple argued quietly, their voices low but tense. At the bar, someone knocked back a drink and slammed the glass down, asking for another. The noise filled the space like thick air. The waitress paused near the kitchen door for a brief moment, holding a tray. Her eyes scanned the room, not with stress, but with focus. She knew exactly where she needed to go next. The cook shouted something from behind her, steam rising from hot pans. She nodded and stepped forward again. To most people, she looked ordinary. Plain uniform, tied-back hair, no jewelry except a simple watch. Nothing about her suggested that she stood out in any way. If anything, she seemed to blend into the background like part of the furniture or the walls. The kind of person you forget the moment you leave. A child at one table knocked over a fork, and it clattered loudly against the floor. The sound added to the chaos. Someone laughed. Someone else sighed. The waitress bent down, picked it up, and replaced it with a clean one without a word. The child stared at her for a second, curious, then turned back to their food. The restaurant was full, and the night was far from over. Orders kept coming in, faster than usual. A screen near the kitchen blinked with new requests. The staff moved quicker, their faces showing signs of pressure. Still, the waitress did not rush. Her movements stayed smooth, almost careful, as if she was moving to a rhythm only she could hear. At one table, a customer snapped their fingers in the air to get attention. She noticed immediately but finished placing plates at another table first. When she arrived, the customer complained about the wait. She listened without interrupting, nodded once, and apologized softly. Her response was calm, without excuse or attitude. The customer seemed ready to argue but stopped, unsure why their anger suddenly felt misplaced. Laughter continued to rise and fall across the room. Jokes were told. Drinks were spilled. Someone cheered as a sports highlight played silently on a screen above the bar. The restaurant felt alive, messy, and careless. No one noticed the waitress wiping her hands on a cloth and taking a slow breath near the counter. For a moment, her eyes drifted toward the far end of the room. Not at the people, but beyond them, as if she was remembering something else. Something distant. Something important. The moment passed quickly. She straightened her shoulders and returned to work. Another order came out wrong, and voices grew sharp near the kitchen. A manager rushed past, clearly stressed. The waitress stepped aside to let him through, her expression unchanged. She had seen nights like this many times before. Nights that felt endless. Nights where everyone wanted something and no one cared who delivered it. A group near the window began laughing even louder, drawing attention from nearby tables. Someone joked about how slow the service was, and more laughter followed. The waitress walked past them, holding a tray, her face neutral. If she heard them, she did not show it. There was something steady about her presence. While everything around her felt rushed and noisy, she remained grounded. She noticed small things others missed. A glass nearly empty, a chair slightly blocking the walkway, a nervous customer twisting their napkin. She fixed each problem quietly without being asked. As the night moved forward, the laughter grew rougher, less joyful. It was the laughter of people who had drunk too much, talked too much, and stopped listening. The restaurant echoed with it. Still, the waitress continued, one table at a time, one step after another. Near the middle of the room, a minor issue began to form. A customer raised their voice, frustrated about a mistake on the bill. Others nearby turned their heads, interested in the small drama. The noise shifted from laughter to irritation. The mood of the room began to change, though no one realized it yet. The waitress approached the table calmly. She listened, nodded, and gently took the receipt. Her hands did not shake. Her voice did not rise. There was no sign of fear or embarrassment. She handled the situation with quiet confidence, as if pressure did not touch her the same way it touched others. Around her, people continued talking, laughing, and complaining. No one knew that this ordinary night was slowly moving toward something unforgettable. No one expected the noise to stop. No one imagined that laughter would soon turn into complete stillness. For now, she was just the waitress, moving, serving, listening, waiting, and the room stayed loud. The noise in the restaurant had grown even louder as the evening wore on. Plates scraped, voices clashed, and laughter bounced off the walls. It was the kind of chaos that some people loved, where energy built like a storm, and no one cared who was in the way. Yet in the middle of it all, the waitress moved with quiet control, carrying trays, balancing dishes, and listening to orders as if she could read the room without speaking. Suddenly, a loud shout from the kitchen pierced through the din. A pan had tipped, spilling food across the counter. The cook swore under his breath, frustrated. Plates were stacking, orders were piling up, and tension started to ripple through the staff. The waitress glanced toward the commotion, then back at the tables she served. She didn't rush, but she moved faster. Her hands were steady, her face calm, as if she had rehearsed this exact scenario hundreds of times. At one table, a group of friends had been arguing over whose turn it was to pay. Their voices rose, overlapping with the laughter and clinking of glasses. The waitress approached quietly, and when she asked if they needed help splitting the bill, they barely noticed. She smiled softly, gave them a few options, and stepped away. The conversation continued, but her presence had a subtle effect. They spoke a little softer, noticing her without realizing it. A child at a nearby table had started crying, small tears rolling down their cheeks. The parents whispered back and forth, clearly unsure what to do. The waitress appeared again, quietly offering a napkin and a gentle smile. She didn't say much, just enough to calm the child. In that moment, the chaos of the room seemed to pause around her, though only for a fraction of a second. Then, an unusual request came from one of the customers. They wanted a complicated dish adjusted in a way that would confuse even the most experienced staff. The cook shouted something, clearly frustrated. Others nearby grumbled at the delay. Without hesitation, the waitress stepped in. She confirmed the order, repeated it clearly, and even suggested a small adjustment to make it possible without slowing down the kitchen. The staff followed her lead, some surprised at her confidence. The request that could have caused more complaints was handled smoothly. The laughter at the bar began to shift in tone. A joke that had started as playful now sounded sharper. People leaned closer to hear each other over the din, some rolling their eyes, others laughing nervously. The waitress moved past them, collecting empty glasses. Her movements were quiet, yet precise, almost like a dance in the middle of chaos. Every step she took seemed to carry an invisible rhythm that kept things from completely falling apart. As she went from table to table, she noticed small signs of tension growing. A couple was arguing quietly but clearly frustrated. Friends were poking at each other in annoyance. A customer tapped their fingers impatiently on the table. She paused briefly at each moment, giving small gestures, a nod, a kind smile, a soft word, enough to let people feel noticed without making them self-conscious. The effect was subtle but powerful. Somewhere in the middle of the restaurant, a loud crash broke through the noise. A waiter had dropped a tray of drinks, and the glasses shattered. People shouted, some laughed nervously, others complained about the mess. The waitress hurried over, assessing the situation quickly. She asked the others to step back, cleared the area, and helped calm the customers nearby. Within moments, the spill was cleaned up, and the energy returned to the room without anyone realizing the near disaster had occurred. The shift was starting. The room, once filled with careless laughter, began to feel a little uncertain. People noticed her more now. She wasn't shouting over them, nor was she frantic. She was just present, moving gracefully through the storm of noise. And slowly, without any announcement, the room started paying attention to her. A customer at one of the corner tables had an unusual request that would normally take extra time. The waitress bent down and listened carefully, nodding as if understanding every detail perfectly. She walked to the kitchen, explained it clearly, and within minutes the special order was prepared correctly. The customer looked around, surprised, seeing other patrons still chatting and laughing. No one realized what had just happened except them, and that small recognition planted the first seed of curiosity. At another table, a group of people had begun arguing over something trivial. Voices rose, hands gestured, and tension built quickly. The waitress approached calmly, repeating back the issue with a soft, measured tone. She suggested a solution that no one had thought of. Suddenly, the room felt a little calmer, and laughter and chatter resumed in a quieter, more controlled way. People noticed the shift, though they didn't understand why. She moved past the tables carrying a tray of desserts, the warm glow of the restaurant lights catching the steam rising from the dishes. Her face remained neutral, yet there was a quiet authority in her movements. Patrons who had barely looked at her before now caught glimpses of someone who seemed almost in command of the chaos without ever raising her voice. The kitchen, still busy and noisy, seemed to rely on her presence without words. A small team of staff moved more efficiently, following her lead. Orders were completed on time. Problems were solved before they grew too large. The manager, noticing the change, gave a quick nod, silently acknowledging her quiet control. At one point, a small argument broke out near the front. A customer was upset about a delayed order. Others nearby were curious, watching the scene unfold. The waitress stepped in, listening with careful attention, offering a simple, effective solution. The customer's anger melted slightly, replaced by surprise and gratitude. The people around them glanced at her, noticing the difference she made without even speaking loudly. Even in the chaos, she found moments of connection. A shy smile to a child, a gentle nod to a frazzled parent, a soft word to a nervous customer. Each action was brief but meaningful, and together they began to change the rhythm of the room. Laughter was still there, but it was no longer uncontrolled. Voices had volume but less sharpness. The energy shifted, slowly, like a tide moving without anyone realizing it. And then, something unexpected happened. The music playing in the background was soft, but someone decided to hum along. Others joined almost instinctively. The laughter started to slow, the voices grew quieter. Patrons looked around, sensing the change but not quite understanding it. The waitress continued moving from table to table, steady and calm, not noticing the effect she had on everyone. By the time a small announcement was made over the speaker, the room felt different. The earlier chaos was fading. People were still talking, still smiling, but there was a sense of pause. Eyes wandered toward the waitress more often now. Some people whispered to one another, noticing her grace under pressure. The room had begun to feel less like a noisy mess and more like a shared experience. The shift was subtle but undeniable. The waitress, ordinary in appearance, had managed to calm the storm without ever raising her voice. She moved quietly, efficiently, and with awareness that others lacked. She was still just a waitress to the casual observer. Yet in that moment, she was the invisible force guiding the night, keeping it from descending further into chaos. For those paying attention, something had changed. The restaurant was still busy, still noisy, but it felt different now. The laughter no longer cut through the room sharply. Conversations had more space. People leaned back in their chairs and noticed the rhythm of the room. And in the center of it all, the waitress moved, quiet, calm, and in complete control, unaware that soon, everyone would see a side of her that no one had ever imagined. The restaurant had begun to settle into a quiet hum, but it was not the quiet of emptiness. It was a quiet that carried curiosity, a feeling that something unusual was about to happen. The waitress moved through the room, carrying a tray of drinks. Her calm, precise steps seemed to slow the chaos, and people began to notice her in a new way. Eyes followed her without even realizing it. She had become the center of attention, though she did not ask for it. A group near the center table was still laughing, but their laughter had softened. They whispered among themselves, glancing occasionally toward her. A customer tapped their fingers on the table impatiently, waiting for their food. The waitress approached, and in a few quiet words, she reassured them. The mood shifted subtly. Conversation slowed. Laughter quieted. People stopped mid-sentence to watch her move with grace and confidence. Then the first note came. She wasn't expected to do anything unusual, yet her fingers found a small piano tucked into a corner of the restaurant. It was not an instrument in use that night, merely decoration, yet her hands moved as if they belonged there. The note rang out soft but clear. Heads turned. The sudden, gentle sound cut through the remaining chatter. Eyes widened. Conversations halted. The laughter faded entirely. Her fingers moved again, and another note followed. Then another. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just fluid motion and sound that seemed to fill the room effortlessly. People stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped speaking. Their eyes were fixed on her. The waitress, who had been invisible for most of the night, had transformed into something that commanded attention. Her ordinary uniform and quiet smile could not hide the extraordinary talent revealed in the music she created. A young man at the bar leaned forward, stunned. He could not speak. A couple at a corner table held their breath. Even the staff in the kitchen paused, trays in hand, unsure whether to continue working or simply watch. The waitress's music carried a kind of power that drew everyone in without effort. No one had ever seen this side of her. No one had imagined it. The melody grew more complex, weaving through the notes with skill and precision that seemed beyond human capability. It was not loud, but it was commanding. The entire restaurant had become a single audience, captivated by the performance that had arrived without warning. The waitress had become a prodigy, though no one had suspected until this very moment. She did not look up. She did not smile or seek approval. She played because it was part of her, as natural as breathing. The room responded instinctively. People leaned closer, as if drawn to hear every detail, every subtle shift in the music. The regular sounds of the restaurant, clinking glasses, murmured words, footsteps, faded entirely. Only the music remained, delicate and powerful at once. A woman at a table near the window gasped quietly. She covered her mouth, trying to hold back a laugh, a cry, or some emotion she could not name. Others had similar reactions. They whispered to one another, but even those whispers were hushed. The energy in the room had transformed. It was no longer about food or drink, complaints or casual conversation. It was about her, the music, and the sheer presence that had appeared from someone no one had truly seen before. Some people had tears in their eyes. Some had smiles that would not fade. Some simply sat in disbelief, unable to process what they were hearing. The waitress continued, unaware of the emotional storm she had caused. She played with intent, with knowledge, with a skill that had been hidden for years, waiting for the right moment to emerge. A child, sitting at a corner table with a parent, stopped crying. Tiny hands rested on the table as eyes widened in wonder. Even the youngest could feel the effect of the performance. There was no fear, no confusion, only awe. The music seemed to communicate something universal, something that crossed age and experience. The waitress's talent transcended explanation. The chef peeked from the kitchen doorway, stunned. He had known her for years, seen her work tirelessly through busy nights, but he had never imagined this. He whispered to the manager, who nodded quietly, both watching without moving. They knew this would change how everyone in the restaurant saw her. No longer was she just a waitress. She was something extraordinary, revealed in the middle of a busy night. The notes continued to flow, each one precise, yet full of emotion. There was power in the silence she commanded. The room, once filled with uncontrolled noise, had become a theater of stillness. People leaned forward, captivated, some moving closer to see how she could create such beauty. Others simply sat in place, mesmerized, unable to move, unable to blink too quickly and miss a single moment. Some of the regular customers, who had come for a casual meal and a laugh, looked around in disbelief. Their assumptions about her had vanished instantly. They had never imagined someone so ordinary could possess something so remarkable. The waitress, in her quiet way, had shifted the reality of the night. What began as a normal evening had transformed into an unforgettable moment of wonder. The music slowed slightly, giving the room a chance to breathe, yet still, silence held. No one dared speak. No one dared move too quickly. The effect of her talent was more than just notes on a piano. It was the sudden understanding that greatness could appear in places no one expected. The room had become a single witness to her gift. A regular, who often joked loudly and drew attention, sat frozen. His laughter had disappeared, replaced by awe. Others followed, realizing that the casual night they expected had turned into something profoundly different. Each person was connected by the experience, silently sharing in the realization of witnessing something rare and beautiful. The waitress's performance began to take on a subtle story, as though she were speaking without words. Notes rose and fell like whispers, telling a tale of quiet strength, hidden talent, and patience. The audience could feel the narrative even without knowing its origin. The room had become a space of respect, of attention, of pure focus, and it was all drawn from someone who had been overlooked for so long. Time seemed to stretch. The music could have lasted hours, yet it was only moments before the first note of conclusion approached. The last sounds lingered in the air like a soft echo. The room did not erupt into applause immediately. They were too stunned to move. Some stared at her, some at each other, confirming silently that what they had just experienced was real. And then, slowly, softly, the first sound of acknowledgement came. A quiet clap from one table, followed by another. Soon, the entire room joined, voices breaking the spell in the gentlest way possible. But the magic had already happened. Laughter had completely disappeared, replaced by silence and awe. Everyone had been touched in a way they did not expect. The waitress, still calm, rose from the piano and returned to her duties. She did not seek praise. She did not smile dramatically. She walked among the tables again, carrying trays and refilling glasses, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Yet the room was forever changed. People looked at her differently now, with respect, curiosity, and a quiet wonder that lingered in the air. The night continued, but it was no longer ordinary. The laughter that had filled the room earlier had been replaced by a reverent quiet. Patrons whispered softly to one another, sharing glances and smiles. The waitress moved through the restaurant, a gentle presence, but one that had left an unforgettable mark on every person who had witnessed her performance. What began as a normal, busy night had become a memory that no one would ever forget. A moment when laughter truly turned to stillness, and everyone saw the extraordinary in the ordinary. After the last note faded, the restaurant remained quiet for a few long seconds. Patrons blinked, unsure if the performance had really happened or if their minds had tricked them. Slowly, whispers began, soft and careful, as people turned to each other, sharing looks of disbelief and amazement. The waitress had returned to her duties as if nothing had occurred, yet everyone in the room had seen something extraordinary. Her skill had revealed a side of her that no one had imagined. At a table near the window, a man spoke quietly to his companion. "Did you see that?" he asked, eyes wide. The other nodded, almost unable to believe what they had witnessed. They discussed the precision, the emotion, and the control in the music, wondering how someone so ordinary could have hidden such talent. Others around them whispered similar thoughts, creating a ripple of awe that spread across the restaurant. The staff looked on from the kitchen and bar, some leaning on counters, mouths slightly open. They had worked alongside the waitress for years and thought they knew her completely, but this had revealed a depth that surprised them all. The cook, who often shouted when stressed, stood quietly, wiping his hands on a towel. The manager nodded to himself, realizing that the night had transformed in ways they hadn't expected. Customers who had come in for a casual dinner were now witnesses to something unique. They spoke in hushed tones, acknowledging the performance and the person who had created it. The waitress moved among them, calm and composed, her steps quiet but purposeful. She smiled occasionally, not seeking attention, but each smile carried warmth, an unspoken connection that made people feel they had shared something special. The woman who had gasped during the performance looked down at her hands, shaking slightly. She realized she had judged the waitress too quickly before, assuming she was just another server in a busy restaurant. Now she understood that appearances could be deceiving. Talent and passion could be hidden beneath the most ordinary of exteriors. The lesson struck her more deeply than she expected. A young couple near the bar whispered to each other about the hidden story of the waitress. They speculated on how she had learned to play so well, imagining hours of practice, sacrifices, and dedication. Perhaps she had given up other dreams to work here, blending her extraordinary talent into the ordinary flow of daily life. Their conversation, quiet as it was, reflected the thoughts of many in the room. People were beginning to understand that the waitress was more than she appeared to be. Even the children, who had been restless earlier, were now calm, some with wide eyes and quiet smiles. They sensed the change in the atmosphere, even if they couldn't fully understand it. The waitress's presence had an effect on everyone, a subtle power that could calm, inspire, and awe simultaneously. She had created a shared moment of wonder that transcended age and experience. As the evening continued, the patrons remained attentive in their own ways. Some returned to their meals but spoke less, savoring each bite as if the food itself had taken on new meaning. Others simply sat, reliving the performance in their minds, replaying the notes, and remembering the way the waitress had moved with such grace. Every small action she took now seemed significant, carrying weight and purpose beyond mere service. A group at the far end of the restaurant began discussing the idea of hidden potential. They talked about how often people overlooked others, assuming that someone's role or position defined their abilities. The performance had sparked something reflective in them. Laughter had disappeared, replaced by thoughtfulness, a quiet recognition that life often concealed the extraordinary in plain sight. The waitress moved past them, clearing empty plates and refilling drinks. She worked efficiently, but now there was a new awareness from the customers. People watched her, noticing her steady hands, the precision in her movements, and the calm confidence she carried. It was as if she had been operating on a different plane all along, one that only revealed itself when needed. The manager walked past, giving her a small nod of acknowledgement. It was a quiet moment, unspoken but full of respect. He had seen many talented people come and go, but rarely someone who could command attention without demanding it. He realized that the value of this waitress was beyond her role in the restaurant. She carried something rare, a skill and presence that left an impact on everyone she encountered. A woman who had been dining alone looked up at the waitress as she passed. She smiled faintly, her expression one of quiet admiration. She thought about her own life, wondering how many talents she might have overlooked in others, how many moments she might have missed because she didn't pay attention. The performance had inspired reflection, a gentle reminder that greatness often hides where least expected. Back in the kitchen, the staff continued to work, but the energy had shifted. The earlier chaos had given way to a controlled rhythm, a subtle harmony influenced by the waitress's performance. They moved more carefully, more thoughtfully, aware that the night had changed in more ways than one. There was respect in their actions, not just for her talent, but for the example she had set in grace under pressure. The child who had been crying earlier now looked at the waitress with fascination. Tiny hands reached for a crayon on the table, and the parent smiled quietly. The atmosphere had transformed so completely that even the youngest participants felt a sense of awe and calm. The room was no longer a simple restaurant. It was a space of shared experience, shaped by the unexpected appearance of brilliance. As the evening progressed, the whispers continued. Customers shared stories, comparisons, and admiration for what they had just witnessed. They discussed what it must have taken to hide such talent while working a job that seemed ordinary. Each conversation carried a mix of curiosity and respect, as though they had discovered a secret about life itself, that extraordinary abilities could exist anywhere, often hidden behind the familiar. The waitress, unaware of the full impact of her performance, continued her work. She carried plates, refilled drinks, and responded to requests with the same calm efficiency. Yet everyone around her had changed. They saw her in a new light, understanding that the person who had seemed ordinary was capable of moments that could capture and move a room entirely. The experience left a lasting impression, one that would linger in memory long after the night ended. A man near the bar leaned back, reflecting on the evening. He realized that he had been quick to judge the waitress earlier, seeing her only in the context of her job. Now he saw the layers beneath the surface: patience, skill, dedication, and grace. The room itself seemed to acknowledge this new understanding. Conversations had slowed, and attention was focused in a way that honored what had just occurred. Even the laughter, when it returned, was different. It was softer, more genuine, filled with the awareness of shared experience. People smiled and laughed, but now with an understanding that they had witnessed something remarkable. The room was alive, but in a way that combined energy with respect, a balance that had been impossible before the performance. By the end of the evening, the patrons left one by one, each carrying a memory of the night that would stay with them. They spoke quietly to each other, sharing moments of awe and admiration. The waitress remained, finishing her duties, unaware of the lasting effect she had on the people around her. She had revealed her hidden talent, and in doing so, had transformed a simple night at a restaurant into a story that would be told again and again. The night had begun as ordinary, filled with laughter, chatter, and casual complaints. It ended as something unforgettable, a story of hidden skill, quiet confidence, and the power of recognition. The waitress, who had been unnoticed for so long, had become the center of attention, not through words or demands, but through the simple, undeniable expression of her extraordinary ability. And for everyone who had witnessed it, the experience would remain a reminder that true talent often lies hidden, waiting for the right moment to shine. The night continued, and though the restaurant slowly emptied, the impact of the performance remained. People left with their conversations hushed, carrying a sense of wonder that had not existed when they arrived. The waitress moved quietly among the remaining customers, clearing empty plates and tidying tables. She worked as she always did, but now each motion seemed to carry significance, a quiet dignity that had not been noticed before. A family lingered near the exit, talking softly. They replayed the music in their minds, describing how it had made them feel. The father admitted that he had never expected to experience such talent in a place like this. The mother nodded, saying that it reminded her to pay more attention to people, to not judge too quickly, and to look for the extraordinary in ordinary situations. The children listened quietly, as if understanding something important, though they could not explain it fully. Across the room, a group of friends discussed how often they overlooked the abilities of others. They laughed quietly, shaking their heads at their own assumptions. They spoke about the waitress, the calmness she carried, and the way she had drawn everyone's attention without demanding it. Her presence had reminded them that every person has hidden layers, and that greatness often appears when least expected. The staff, too, had changed in their perception. The cook cleaned pots with new care, glancing occasionally toward the floor where the piano had stood. The manager walked through the dining area, quietly observing how the room had shifted. He realized that the waitress's hidden talent had created something more valuable than any praise or tip: a moment of genuine connection among strangers. He silently acknowledged that she had altered the rhythm of the restaurant that night. The waitress moved to the bar, collecting empty glasses. A young man who had witnessed the performance asked her how she had learned to play so well. She smiled softly, shrugged slightly, and answered simply that she had practiced for many years. There was no boastfulness, only honesty. Her humility made the moment even more powerful, leaving the young man in quiet admiration. As the last few customers prepared to leave, they lingered, unsure how to depart after such an experience. Some whispered thanks, others simply nodded. Each gesture carried meaning, acknowledging the rare moment they had witnessed. The waitress continued her work, returning plates and taking orders with the same steady hands. She did not bask in the attention, yet it lingered around her, like an invisible halo that followed her quietly. Outside, the night was calm. The city lights reflected off the windows of the restaurant. Inside, the atmosphere had changed completely from the chaos of the earlier hours. People moved with care, spoke with thoughtfulness, and carried a sense of connection that had not been there before. The waitress had shifted the energy without realizing the depth of her effect. What began as an ordinary night had transformed into an unforgettable evening of shared wonder. The last customer left, giving a small wave and a smile of appreciation. The waitress returned the gesture, her own smile quiet but warm. She turned toward the kitchen, placing a tray on the counter and taking a deep breath. The work was done. The night had ended, but the memories created would remain. She had shown that true talent can exist anywhere, quietly waiting for the right moment to emerge. The manager walked over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. He said nothing, only nodded. The gesture spoke volumes. Recognition, respect, and a quiet gratitude for the impact she had made. She nodded back, her expression calm, aware of the acknowledgement but not moved by it. She did what she loved, and the results spoke for themselves. Back in the empty restaurant, she moved slowly, tidying tables, wiping counters, and arranging chairs. The space was peaceful now, a stark contrast to the noisy, chaotic hours before. She paused near the piano, glancing at it briefly. The memory of her performance filled her mind, not with pride or attention, but with satisfaction. It was a moment of personal fulfillment, a reminder of what she was capable of, and how much strength she carried beneath the ordinary exterior. Outside, the city had quieted. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement, reflecting the calm that now existed inside the restaurant. People had left with memories of something extraordinary. Conversations would linger in their minds for days, and stories would be shared of the waitress who had turned laughter into silence. She had created a moment that reminded everyone of the beauty in hidden talent, the power of calm, and the significance of noticing the unnoticed. The staff cleaned up, chatting quietly, their earlier rush replaced by reflection. They spoke of the performance and its effect, and of the waitress, whose ordinary presence had become extraordinary. They realized that true impact does not always come from words, but from the quiet expression of skill, dedication, and passion. As the night came to a close, the waitress stepped outside briefly, taking in the cool air. She looked up at the stars, calm and content. The world continued, but a small part of it had been changed by her music and her presence. She had reminded everyone in the restaurant, from customers to staff, that greatness can exist in anyone, and sometimes it takes only a moment for it to be revealed. Returning inside, she switched off the lights, locked the door, and walked toward the back room. She moved silently, aware of the evening's impact but undisturbed by attention. For her, the joy was in the doing, in the sharing of her talent, and in the subtle way it had touched others. The night had begun with laughter and chaos, but it ended with calm, reflection, and a deep sense of connection. In the days that followed, the restaurant returned to its normal rhythm. Customers came and went, staff worked their shifts, and the space once again became familiar. But those who had been there that night remembered. They spoke quietly to friends and family about the waitress, her music, and the way a single moment had transformed a room. Her performance became a memory cherished by many, A story of hidden talent, calm authority, and unexpected wonder. The waitress continued her life as she always had, serving tables, smiling quietly, and moving with precision. She did not seek recognition or fame. She simply carried within her the ability to create moments that could touch hearts, inspire awe, and remind people that ordinary appearances often hide extraordinary gifts. And in that quiet way, she changed the lives of everyone who had witnessed her that night, leaving behind a legacy of silence, respect, and the undeniable power of hidden talent.